So I call to order the Housing Policy Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, September 19th. It is currently 3:37 p.m. I'll open us up with the invocation, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Please bow your heads. Father God, we just come before you today, just thanking you for this day, this time that we have. We thank you for our speaker, the person that's bringing to the presentation to us, Ms. Lala Hackett. I thank you, Father God, that the information that she brings towards this committee is something that is beneficial to each person that needs it. I just thank you that it's something that, we can learn from, but then we can also use as a resource and as a tool to help improve the lives of those who need it. And so, God, we just, again, thank you for this day, this time, and just ask that you would just lead us and guide us into all truth and all wisdom. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. So, Councilor Quinn, before you have the minutes, have you had a chance to review them?
Yes, I have, and I motion that we approve the minutes.
All right, I second that. And those minutes are approved and passed. And we will move forward to our presentation. So Ms. Lala Hackett, here with us today from the Fair Housing Center of Northern Alabama. Is here to give us a presentation and tell us about, what you all do over at the Fair Housing Center of Northern Alabama, and how can this committee and as well as the rest of the council partner with you all to get some of this information out.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you today and to talk about fair housing, something that I'm quite devoted to, something that I love very dearly. And having been a victim of housing discrimination, I know how victims feel. Mm-hmm. So I'm very passionate about what we do. To just give you a little bit of the history of fair housing, we actually opened in 1993 as a result of a housing discrimination study that HUD and the Urban Institute did back in the late 1980s. And as a result, there was an interest group formed, and from this interest group developed a board of directors. Mm. And the board of directors, I think, functioned for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then decided it was actually time to open a center. So they applied for some assistance from the National Fair Housing Alliance, which is the national organization that represents fair housing centers across the country. They applied for a small grant from HUD to open us, which was our seed money, and that was in 1993. Mm-hmm. And we opened June 3rd, 1993. And I was fortunate enough to be selected as their director, and I've been there ever since. So I've been truly devoted to what I do and how we help citizens. Again, we are a private nonprofit agency, 501c3, and most of our funds over the years have come from the Department of Housing and Urban Development through the Fair Housing Initiatives Program. And this is a government-sponsored program that's directly developed to support fair housing centers across the country. It's a competitive program, so you always have to submit applications. We used to have to do it yearly. Now it's an every 3-year process. So that's where most of our funds have come from over the years. We receive community development block grant funds from the city of Birmingham and have been receiving those funds for about 29 of the 30 years we've been here. So, we're most appreciative to the city for the assistance that you've been giving us over the years. We've done some work for the city in terms of the first 2 analysis of impediment studies that the city did. They contracted with us, and we developed both of those documents for the city. The third document, I think the city had developed, they contracted with an independent company, and they contacted us, and we actually submitted a lot of our information to them to help them in their, development of the third one. The fourth one that the city did, we also worked, with the company that they, contracted with to do some of that work. When we did it, we, used some of our testers to go out into the community and actually do door-to-door, interviews. The University of Alabama developed a, survey form for us, and we used that to go door to door. So I think we interviewed maybe about 1,300 citizens in the city to help us put that document together, getting their input on what they thought the city needed to do, the problems that they thought the city was experiencing, and how we could address it, how we could help. So that was the, actually, we did that for the first and second document that we developed for the city.
When was that?
I think we did the first one back in, I think it was maybe 2001 or 2002. Then we did another one about 3 or 4 years later. And since that, they've done 2 more, and both of those have been contracted out.
Do you know when the most recent analysis of impediments was
I think the
performed?
most recent, this is 23, I think the most recent one was maybe in 20 or 21. It has not been long.
And was that spearheaded by the Department of Community Development?
Yes. And that's a document that the city is required to do as a part of your obligations to affirmatively favor fair housing. So all across the country, cities and counties and states develop an analysis of impediments to fair housing.
This, I'm sorry,
so-
you're asking questions that I'm interested in. I mean, I'm asking questions. Your state's talking about stuff that I know very little about, but am curious about. So
Sure.
the affirmatively furthering fair housing, that's a federal policy that, to my understanding, has been under review. And has there been any update on that in recent months? The last I heard that it was still being tweaked, yeah. But it's something that could potentially have a lot of impact, on, a lot of cities, but something that we need to be aware of here in Birmingham too.
Definitely, and when they complete the revision of that document, the city will receive instructions as to how to put that document together again. Because the first instructions were not specific enough, cities and counties and states were some just put enough together to say that they were doing something. Some really did a very intensive study of what was going on in that city. And I commend Birmingham because we knew that we couldn't just give you anything, so we had to make sure that the document was something that HUD would actually approve and accept. And so the first 2 documents we did, we were very proud of them. They were probably about that thick. And we do have copies of them. I was looking at one the other day, because we generally try to keep copies of the kind of work that we do. So if you'd like to ever see one, I'm sure you probably have copies here at the city, but if you'd ever like to see one, please just let me know and I will bring it over so you can see it.
If you have an executive summary, we might take a look at that.
Yeah, there is a summary in the back of the documents.
Okay.
And we were actually really proud of the work that we did because the next 2 that the city contracted for, they used basically the same impediments that we had listed initially. One group did, I think they added a couple, but for the most part, what you see in our first 2 documents will be the same impediments that the city is still experiencing that were included in the 3rd and 4th documents. So we think we did a pretty thorough job because we actually, as I said, we went out into the community and knocked on doors. And we selected different communities around the city so it wouldn't all come from one area. and we used those to put that document together, so we thought it was quite representative of, you know, what the citizens felt, not just what we felt at the Fair Housing Center, but what the citizens of Birmingham felt.
Okay.
Any more questions about that?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
All right, Councilor Clark, do you have any other questions or?
I probably missed everything. I had to come in late and then ask y'all all the stuff.
She was just giving us background on the Fair Housing Center, and until I interrupted her, so.
Well, I do know Ms. Hackett, and I'm a fan of her work, of the agency's work. We're actually colleagues, you know, in home buyer education. But, which there is a fair housing segment that goes into that because, you know, people might be discriminated against when they put in an offer for a house or try to lease space. So, I mean, and an appraisal bias. So just making sure people understand. And I'm also on her appraisal bias task force. We have a meeting coming up.
Next week.
But I was just wondering how you're doing financially. I know you want it to be back in the city budget, you know, because a lot of your work is in the city of Birmingham, but now you serve a lot of jurisdictions. Do you get funding support from any of these other jurisdictions?
We get very little funding support from the other jurisdictions. We are contracting now with the city of Huntsville, and I don't know how much that is going to be, but they have told us that they did have some funds left from the CDBG funds for this year. So they will give us those, and then they will definitely include us in the '24 budget. So we're looking forward to that. We've received approval from Jefferson County for, I think, $10,000 from Jefferson County, just from one of the commissioners. You were looking like just one of the commissioners.
Like discretionary?
Yeah, discretionary funds. So we're asking all of them for funding, and we're going to apply to them for community development funds. I think their application goes out in January, I believe that's right. So we will be asking them for funds. None of our other areas have really contributed. We have done some work for the city of Decatur and the housing authority there, and we have received funding that way from Decatur. But the rest of our service area have not been that receptive to contributing, and that's why we depend so heavily on the FIP program funding, because once we send in our application for FIP funding, it
What's
covers,
Oh,
it's the Fair Housing Initiatives funding under
Okay.
HUD. And that funding is just for fair housing centers.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we don't have the luck that you have being under
NeighborWorks.
NeighborWorks, because NeighborWorks is definitely set up differently. The funding comes through NeighborWorks. Our national office, the National Fair Housing Alliance, has to apply just like the membership. So they do not get funding like NeighborWorks receives funding, nor do they receive funding like the National Urban League receives funding. So all of the fair housing centers that are members of the National Fair Housing Alliance, all of us have to compete for funding. Our national office also. They usually get the $1 million grant for developing our public service announcements. You'll see we have around the city of Birmingham now about 8 billboards. And all of those billboards were developed under that media campaign that HUD funds every year, and it always goes to our national office. Then they have to apply for education funding, fair housing education, as well as fair housing enforcement, which is the same thing that the rest of us have to apply for. So that's why we can't, I've been asked several times, why can't you apply to your national office for funding, they have to apply just like we do. So it's not like they have the NeighborWorks funding where your funding comes down from them, so.
Some of it,
Yeah, some of it, but at least you know you have,
something to
From
work
funding.
with, yeah.
that's not what happens with us.
I just have one more question. So like if we were, I think we're gonna do something out of discretionary maybe. But if we were trying to advocate to get, for you to be in the mayor's budget, so to speak, what's the value to the citizens of what you do? Can you kind of,
Okay,
give us
and
that
let me
case?
clear up a question that I'm sure you would have. Any funding that we receive from the city of Birmingham will be used just for the work here in the city. And we are accustomed to that. Our CDBG funds that we receive from the city for education is just used here for the city. The funding that we use for the remainder of our service area, that's what comes from the FIP funding. So if we get additional funding this time from the city to help us stay alive, that will just be used here. And we will not use their funding outside the city. So all of our work will be concentrated here. We do have a couple of cases, well, a few cases open that are in other areas. We will complete those, but because we can't leave people just hanging, so we will complete those cases that are already open. But in terms of accepting new cases from Tuscaloosa or Anniston or Gaston or any of those areas, we would not do that until we have secured funding either from those areas or we have our FIP funding back.
Gotcha.
So, you don't have to be concerned about us taking Birmingham's money and using it to resolve situations in other areas, because we definitely could not do that.
No, we're not worried about that. We'll make sure we get those dollars used here. But no, she was asking about the value add for,
Yeah, how would we articulate, say to our constituents, why it's so important to have
Well, first of all,
your office functioning, existing and functioning in our community?
Yeah, it's just existing, because I did have to let my staff go. When I was talking with you the last time,
Everybody,
okay.
just two of us, me and Jay. Everybody else.
when do they leave?
On the 8th, was that last day? Friday before last.
Okay.
Yeah.
But no, just the value add to constituents so that, we would be able,
Sure.
what you said.
We think that we have a program that, there is no program here in the city other than ours that supports fair housing. When people are discriminated against, the only place they can come to us only place they can go is to come to us. Probably 97% of our clients would not be able to afford a private attorney. We do have 2 or 3 attorneys here in the city who have some fair housing experience, and they will accept cases. But if they come from us, if we refer them, they take them on contingency. If they go on their own, they have to pay. So that's number one, in being able to afford to provide free services for people who are experiencing fair housing discrimination. It's traumatic enough to have to face that, than not to have somewhere to go where you can get some assistance from somebody who knows what they are doing to help. We work with anybody, the 7 protective classes, and I have them listed here on the sheet that HUD covers. We accept anybody under those 7 protective classes. That's race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability. And that could be anybody. I had been disabled as a result of a fall one morning. I was getting ready to go to a HUD meeting. And I started down the steps at my home, tripped on the steps, broke my left ankle, broke my right heel, and fractured my right ankle. So I was in cast and a wheelchair for about 14 weeks. So I can tell anybody, I've experienced what it feels like to be disabled. Not being able to go through your home because some of your doors are too narrow, not being able to use the facilities in the kitchen sometimes because handles are too high, you can't reach them. I had people laughing one day because I went to, if you remember when Provisions was in 5 Points West.
That's been a long time.
Yeah, that's been a long time.
Very, it was
And that
downstairs.
was, yeah. I was school shopping for my children, and so they pulled up to the curb, they helped me out into a wheelchair, we went in the store. You know, they had the big wide doors to go in. But once I got in there and started trying to go down the aisles to look at clothing, most of the time the aisles were not wide enough. And that's not fair housing, that's ADA. Those ADA regulations that the store was not complying with. And I asked to speak to the manager. And I told him, you know, I was trying to shop. And my wheelchair would not go down through the little aisles so I could see. And he apologized. He said, you know, nobody has ever brought this to our attention. And the next time I went back to Parisians in 5 Points West, they had moved the aisles. They had moved the, you know, the displays, and you could actually get a wheelchair down through there. And he sent me a note and said, thank you so much for bringing this to our attention, because otherwise someone could have filed an ADA complaint against them.
Mhm.
I didn't want the ADA complaint, I just wanted them to realize that, you know, there were people who wanted to shop at their store, but couldn't, it was not convenient. So, as I said, I've been a victim. That's not my only experience, because we were trying to buy a home and we were scared. So I know how that feels. So I can, as I said, I can identify with people who are facing housing discrimination. Anytime we receive a call from someone who's asking for a reasonable accommodation, simply sometimes grab bars, a ramp, these are simple things. Oftentimes management will say no. If that person has documentation that they actually have a disability, sometimes it will be someone requesting to keep a service animal or a companion animal, and the management will say no. If they have documentation from their doctors or their therapists saying that they are required to have these animals, no pet fee can be charged. Many times they are charging pet fees, no pet fees, and you have to get the permission to have that service animal or that companion animal. If they're asking for grab bars, if you constructed that building right, you can put grab bars in those bathrooms with no, you know, no major construction, just putting those grab bars up. Many times they will deny that. We had a professor over at the university who had a stroke, and he was able to move around. He was in his wheelchair. He was still teaching his class on the UAB. But the HOA, Homeowners Association, had denied him permission to widen his driveway so he could get a van in the driveway and could have access to his home. They told him that that would destroy the view because he lived in a little cul-de-sac, beautiful community, and they denied him. He called us and told us what happened. We wrote them a letter, informed them that he was disabled. There was nothing that was going to, you know, destroy that community with him widening a driveway, because he had gotten an architect to come out to do the plans to make sure everything was in order. He also wanted to add like a little shed over, well, it's not the proper, like he had a patio. He actually wanted to cover that patio because he couldn't take that direct sun, and he liked sitting outside. They denied that and said that that would take away from the aesthetics of the community. Well, no. So we wrote them a letter to explain to them that this was against fair housing, that he had a right to make the changes to their driveway and to add that little top over his patio. He had, you knew he was in a wheelchair, you know, so it wasn't like we didn't know he had a disability. But, he had information from his doctor to say that he could not have the direct sunlight, which justified putting the top over the patio. And he needed that widened driveway to get his fan up and be able to get in and out of the van. And they decided to argue with us, and we just took a picture of the law, mailed it to them, and the attorney for the HOA called us back and apologized and said, well, my staff did this, and they, you know, were not familiar with fair housing, so we will inform the HOA that he has to be granted permission. So, you know, these are some of the kinds of situations.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. How many cases would you say that you all see each year?
It varies every year. We might have 100, 125 cases. We might not have with 75 or 80 cases one year. So it's never, you know, we never know how many people are gonna call and complain. But, so it varies. But
Yes.
when we look at cases, we look at families, the number of people in the family, because it might just be one person with that disability, but it might be a household of 6 or 7 people. So they are all impacted by the yes approval or the nay disapproval of the request. When we look at families being steered from one community to another, unfortunately, realtors are still steering. Their national office, you know, is really behind fair housing, but you still have individuals that you're dealing with. And we still have some realtors who will steer. We have sometimes sellers who will instruct their agents to not show homes to particular people. So what we've done is talk with agents and told them, if this happens to you, then you have been discriminated against because you've lost a sale in many instances. So, you know, what we do impacts a lot of lives. I commend the city on the amount of money that you're spending on youth programs. Some of those same students might be impacted because their families might be discriminated against. And they could be active in a program at this school, and the family ends up having to move across town. That student is no longer able to participate in that particular activity at that school, so they have to start all over again.
In another side of town.
On the other side of town, they can be friends and trying to find a program which might not be available there.
Let me ask you this. I know you were saying that you all have attorneys that are on staff or just in partnership.
They are not on staff. They have signed agreements with us to accept our clients on contingency.
So is it different law firms that you all have?
Yeah, we
Okay.
have about 3 law firms locally. We have one in Tuscaloosa and one up in the Huntsville area. We have 3 or 4 here in Birmingham. So they have all agreed to work with our clients on contingency. So they will accept our cases and they get paid when they win. So we laugh often because we know that they're going to work hard trying to make sure that they win their case because that's when they
Get paid.
get paid.
Exactly. And then I guess annual budget, like how much would you, or what would you say the amount is?
Our annual budget prior to this year had been about 400,000. 375 from HUD, and then the additional monies, well, a little over 400,000 because the additional monies that we would receive from the city, the 45,000 that we received from the city for education. Now, our grant with the city is just for fair housing education. It does not include any of our enforcement activities at all. Our grant with CDBG says education and outreach.
Do I recall correctly that you guys hosted a workshop on appraisal bias at the Botanical Gardens? Was that this year?
That was part of our fair housing, well, April is National Fair Housing Month.
Mm-hmm.
And as a part of our fair housing seminar, we had the session on appraisal bias.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And we have developed an appraisal bias task force, and as Carol said, she is one of our members. We have a meeting next week, but we have been receiving a number of appraisal bias complaints. And we just decided it was time to look into it, to just see how deep this goes in our community, if there is something that we can do to assist people who are facing this situation. And we've looked at, several cases across the country that fair housing centers have handled and have been able to resolve with the assistance of naturally of attorneys, because it really becomes very complicated.
So was that workshop one of the part of the programming that was supported by the funding from the city of Birmingham? So you said that you guys get somewhere between 75 and 125 cases annually. I assume that is the cases that actually fall within the purview of what you guys work on, but I would say that you guys probably get at least 10 times that number of calls that a month that you cannot, that's out of your purview.
That's true.
Right.
We receive landlord-tenant complaints all day, every day, and as I've said before, there is no organization, program here that actually handles landlord-tenant complaints.
I think we've made that mistake before, our office. We prefer people to you.
And we accept it, because I think I put a little statement on here that as a courtesy, we do landlord tenants sometimes. If we have the time, if it's not something that's too complex that we can handle, and it will not take us away from what we're doing too long, then we try to, because people with landlord tenant complaints kind of get lost in the shuffle. There's really nowhere for them to go. And we had said that we were going to do our best, once we get our funding settled, to try to find some additional funds to hire some staff just to do landlord tenant work.
Did you say that you all partnered with volunteer lawyers?
We do.
Birmingham? Okay.
Yeah. We
Cause
sent, I think we sent 3 people last week.
yeah, because I know that they do some of that work
Yeah, they do.
with
Yeah.
landlord tenants.
Yeah.
So,
But for the most part, we don't have enough attorneys and volunteer lawyers to handle all of the cases, and we get them all day.
Oh,
Because
sorry.
people think they have fair housing cases, and they aren't actually fair housing, they're landlord-tenant cases. And so once we can show them the difference, because all they know is that, there is a problem with the landlord, and so they think it's a fair housing issue. So we have to take the time to try to explain to them the difference. And we actually did a renters workshop about 2 Saturdays ago with the city as a co-host out at the library, 5 Points West Library. And Alice Williams was the city's representative. And we did that in conjunction with legal services. We invited them to come out to do the main presentation on tenant rights. And so Alice and I talked about it, and she and Liz talked about it, to do some around the city. We just did that one at 5 Points. And so we're gonna try to do that around the city, because we think renters need to know what their rights are. We try to do trainings with housing providers so that they will know what their rights are, as well as, the rights of the tenants. And if you look at Alabama landlord-tenant law, everything is geared toward the owner, not the tenant. So, it's very important for tenants to know their rights.
well, I know you were about to
I
ask.
was just gonna say something about,
Excuse me.
I noticed that, there was no reference to source of income, and I know that's something you've been interested in and working on from the city ordinance standpoint, but Do you think source of income discrimination will ever make it into the fair housing law? Because I do think some of this landlord-tenant dynamic is because the people have vouchers and they feel like they're not gonna go anywhere. So they push it as far as they can push it, you know, and I guess the authority that should be inspecting maybe isn't. And so, I mean, I hear that sometimes from Section 8 voucher holders who really don't want to lose their apartment. And so they're afraid that if they go hard on the landlord, they're going to be put out and retaliated against.
Absolutely,
And
and
so-
there don't have very many options out there.
Right.
It's hard as hell to find a landlord that will work with you if you have a housing choice voucher in the first place.
So it's almost discrimination in a
Yes,
way
it is.
against the voucher holder in a weird sort of way.
It
But-
is, and there are some cities, and some states who actually have fair housing regulations or laws that include, source of income. For probably the first 10 or 12 years that we were here, we tried our best to work with the states, to get them to become a substantially equivalent state. That simply means that our state laws will be equivalent to those of the federal laws. And that has just not worked for the state of Alabama. HUD has tried. HUD Birmingham area office used to work with us trying to get the state to do something. HUD Washington even came down during that time to try to see if they could get the state to enact enough excuse me, regulations so they would be substantially equivalent. And they would have just not changed. So, you know, we have a problem trying to be able to include locally some of the regulations that we need because the state has them.
Yeah. Well, I guess,
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Good.
I'm done.
Well, Ms. Haggett, I know you came down to kind of give us a presentation and share with us information about what the organization does and the value that you all add to the community. But I also wanted to know if there was an ask on behalf of the organization that you wanted to make to us.
Well, definitely, we have asked the city, and we hope that the city will give us, we had asked for $200,000. This was to make sure that we can keep our doors open until we're able to apply for funds from HUD again. As I've said before, we never know when the NOFA, that's the Notice of Federal Application, will come. Last year, it opened in November. That's no guarantee that it's going to open in November this year. We never know until we receive information from HUD because they will normally send out to all agencies that are on their roster the NOFA, or at least the link to the NOFA so that you will know it's time to apply. And our national office also will notify us so we'll know when the NOFA is out. You usually, the amount of time that they give you to apply for it varies. Sometimes you'll have 45 days, sometimes you'll have 60 days. With each administration, it's different. The time that the NOFA comes out with each administration has been different. We used to receive it back in April, then they started sending it out in June or July, then they moved it to September. Now this last time it was in November. So as I said, we never know, but we'll just be prepared when it's out to make application. We have, in our 30 years, we have never been not funded when we have submitted an application for enforcement. Education is a little more competitive because they have a lot less in that funding budget. So they will usually not fund but about 40 education grants. So you have to have anywhere from 100 to 95 average point to receive education most of the time. But with the enforcement grants, if you get a 90 or 95, anywhere from 90 to 100, you're pretty much assured that you were going to get funded, and we have not, as I said, not received funding.
Question.
Sure.
Under the city's consolidated plan for CDBG, is fair housing in northern Alabama, you know, do you guys qualify for some component of that? And have you guys, you know, been, you know, in that conversation?
We have received, as I said, we have received community development block grant funds for 29 of the 30 years that we've been here.
Mm-hmm. But it's just for the education piece?
It's just for education.
Okay.
The only other funding we received was the funding that we received for the two AIs that we did. I think we received grants for $75,000 for those, but they were definitely in different years.
Mm-hmm.
Then we received funding for the CARES Act for COVID. We did receive, we applied for I think 76,000, and we were approved for that for COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the only other grants that we received, other than when the city has given us some additional funds. We asked for some funds about 4 or 5 years ago, because the sequence of when we were going to be receiving our FIP funding and when our contract end was going to be about a 4-month period.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would not have had funding then. So we did ask the city for some, I guess we called it gap funding. And they did give us, I think, $75,000 for that. And it did take us over those 4 months when we were without funding from HUD because of the time period that HUD was going to be starting the grants. There is no specific grant cycle in terms of when your grant starts, because sometimes HUD will be late in making the announcements. So if your grant was going to, current grant was say going to end in January, HUD didn't make the new announcements until February, then you wouldn't get funding until March or April. So it, you know, most fair housing centers will find themselves sometimes with a gap in the funding, in the new funding cycles. We did that. Now, we have been in the city's general fund, or the mayor's budget, this kind of,
General fund budget.
General fund budget,
I
okay.
couldn't think of what to call it.
when Miriam Witherspoon was counselor, she had asked to place us in the budget. And I think we received either 125 or 150, 2 years that she had asked. And the year after she passed, Stephen Hoyt asked, and we were placed in the budget for $125,000. And that was in addition to the CDBG funds that we were receiving. Ms. Witherspoon kept saying that she could understand the plight of persons who were disabled because she had become disabled as a result of an accident. So she was very compassionate about people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
She was on our board. She volunteered to be on our board. And she said she felt like this was something that the city should support because there are so many people who become disabled for so many different reasons. I had my accident. Hers was the result of an accident, and she was permanently in her wheelchair. I was just blessed that, you know, I was able to heal, and so after 4 months I was out of my wheelchair, but she was very passionate about it and said that she felt like this was just something that the city needed to support, that what we did, people needed.
So
And so,
help me understand what fair housing's, you know, area of specialty is, because on the subject of, you know, ADA, you know, I know of at least one other organization, Disability Rights and Resources, that sort of works in that arena as well. So what is Fair Housing of Northern Alabama's, you know, wheelhouse?
Well, we do a number of things. It's not just disability.
Mhm.
That's just one of the protected classes.
Mhm.
Familial status, which is families with children.
Mhm.
Families are denied housing. We have a case now, and I talked to the complainant this morning. She had applied for a home, and they had approved everything. She had paid the deposit. She had been told that she needed to have the utilities placed in her name. She had gone, had the utilities placed in her name. The owner of the house called her and asked her if she had any children. She said yes, she had 2. And he said, okay. Nothing else was said. The day before she was supposed to move into the house, they called her to tell her that the owner had decided he didn't want any children in his home. So she couldn't have the house. And he had some other properties that she could look at. So there she was, preparing to move into a house with her 2 children, and the owner decided he didn't want any children in the house. So she had to go look at, I think, 3 other houses that they were going to show her. She called because the house that she finally moved into has mold in it. She said it was infested with rodents, and she had asked them to, you know, call someone out and try to get the house cleaned out. They told her she had signed a lease, so it was her responsibility. And there's nothing she can do about the mold. You know, how many of us can afford to have mold removed from homes, and why would you want to do it if you're renting? It's not your property. And the landlord told her that, no, you know, she just have to deal with it. You know, some of these things sound far-fetched sometimes,
Right.
but these are actually situations that people live through. So we do landlord-tenant in terms of illegal evictions. Sometimes they're based on fair housing issue. And the landlord just decides, you know, they don't want to resolve the issue, so they evict them. We had a lady last week to call us to tell us what she was going through in terms of an illegal eviction. We were able actually to just send her upstairs to legal services, and we had enough time that they could work on it. Because the problem with legal services is that there is truly a timeline that they will accept their case in. And if it's less than the number of days that they specify, people are just kind of left out in the cold. So there we are, trying to represent them in court. If the if the judge will let us, sometimes we can go in as an advocate and represent the client and try to stop some of these illegal evictions. So we will do that. People are discriminated based on religion. You know, I wouldn't discriminate on somebody against somebody just because of their religion, but people do. There are communities that don't want people in who are of certain religious beliefs. So we take those cases. We take national origin cases, ethnicity. The Hispanic community, they are targeted frequently. And so these are cases that come to us. Those are fair housing cases because they are covered under the Federal Fair Housing Act. I said familiar status, sex, sexual orientation, sexual harassment, those are cases covered under Federal Fair Housing Act. So we now have 2 opened sexual harassment cases, and both of those are local. So, you know, we do a whole lot more than just disability. That just seems to be the hot topic because we receive so many disability cases or complaints. But we do the whole 7 protected classes. So if you're covered under any of those classes, those
So-
cases we take.
Yeah, thinking. So you mentioned previously that there was a report that the city is required at certain intervals to produce barriers to fair housing, impediments to fair housing. Apart from that, is fair housing in northern Alabama, you know, and I know that you guys are sort of not in your typical circumstances at the moment, but assuming that you were fully operational, would you have the capacity, would Fair Housing of Northern Alabama have the capacity to essentially do consulting and for the city of Birmingham, specifically on the topic of an aspiration of the council wanting to explore the idea of adopting a rental registration ordinance. It's something that's been discussed for many years in the city of Birmingham that would essentially create a system where if you were offering a property for rental, each individual unit would have to be permitted. And in order for that unit to be permitted for advertisement and a lease, there would have to be an inspection conducted to make sure that there's power, water, a roof, and that other factors like mold and other things, those types of conditions don't exist. Because what we have currently is that there are some landlords that have all of those things in some state of disrepair that are trying to lease those properties. And they're not fit for livestock to live in. So, and exploring the potential pathways to, the city providing support, would Fair Housing of Northern Alabama to be able to bring, expertise to the table in a professional services type arrangement on those types of topics?
I think so. We had talked about actually establishing a register, and I know that has to be maybe 15 or 20 years ago, because we knew that was needed. We have just not, as I said, had the funding to branch off and do a lot of these additional things that we have known for a long time needed to be done in order to make certain that people are living in safe and sanitary housing. Because we, as I said, with landlord-tenant issues, we get calls all day. And 2 staff persons went out, actually the last week that they were with us, they went out to look at a home where a woman had called. Well, she called on behalf of a Hispanic family. They were renting a house, sight unseen. When they got there, it was not livable. There were major holes in the floor, said that you could look through the ceiling and see the sky because there were holes just that large. There were some major problems in the bathroom floors because they had glided around the commode area, that kind of thing. So, we are quite aware that that's needed because that would eliminate a lot of the landlords had issues because people would actually be moving into habitable, housing and not moving into somewhere they think is habitable and get there and find out it's a different story. And once you sign that lease and give that landlord that money, it's just basically a lost cause.
Right.
And so the one who was calling on behalf of the Hispanic family said that they had reached out to the landlord and they had said they'd get back with them. And that was the only thing that the landlord had said, they'd get back with them. Which meant that nothing was going to be done. They were going to be, if they chose to live there, they would be living under those circumstances. So we would definitely like to, join you around the table to talk about that issue, to see exactly what we could do to help to put this together.
And just to, add this too, honestly, I think that would be good because it'll put us in a proactive position to eliminate issues before they even become an issue. I think, right now you all are in a situation though where you need to be able to secure funding now because I guess from what you just shared with us today, it's a possibility where you all won't even be in existence if you aren't able to secure funding from the FIT, is it the FIT funding?
Yeah.
FIT funding. And so today you were asking about 200. Was that the number 200,000 from the city?
200,000 from the city.
Okay. And I mean,
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that we, have some conversation with Dr. Thomas,
okay.
Along those lines, just to explore ideas.
And or Chaz.
Yeah,
Why not both?
yeah.
Why not both? Because I think we all believe that the information and the service that you all provide to our city is one that is definitely necessary, and it falls directly in line with what we're trying to accomplish and serving the people that we're advocating for. And so if there's a way for us to not only support you in continuing this work, but even reinforcing it so that we can do more, I think that this will be a great opportunity for us to kind of stand in the gap for you and your organization. So I think that's a great idea. And so yeah, I think that this is definitely, for me, eye-opening, just to be able to, again, learn about the different things and services that you all provide, and for other folks who may be listening and watching this to learn as well, so that they can take advantage of it. And so, yeah, I appreciate you coming here today and sitting down with us. Let me see. I had a couple of announcements that I wanted to read off, and then after that, we can adjourn. I know that the NARAB Black Empowerment event will be taking place at Miles College from Wednesday, November 8th to Saturday, November the 11th. It's a great event to discuss housing shortages and blight in the Black community. And most importantly, we'll be discussing how we can increase home ownership and complete communities. More details to come as we get closer to the event. And that's all I had. I thought I had more announcements than that. The next Housing Policy Committee will take place on Tuesday, October the 17th. Anybody that wants to present items for the agenda must be submitted by Wednesday, October the 11th by 4 p.m. to terry.chapman@birminghamal.gov. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. And we are adjourned. Thank you.